Hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. Sit down, please. I would like to speak English today too, to improve my speaking skill. Let's get it started. The sound coming from the outside was so loud that I could hardly hear my stereo. The noise coming from the outside was so loud that I could scarcely hear my CD. I was so tired yesterday, so I could hardly eat dinner. I was so tired last night that I could scarcely eat dinner. Now that I am 19 years old, I can no longer play the guitar. I can hardly play the guitar. I can scarcely 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 play the guitar. When I went to the park yesterday, there are hardly any people. There were hardly any people in the park. There were scarcely any people in the park. I am hardly fine. I am hardly fine now. I am hardly fine now. I am scarcely fine. I am scarcely fine. I can hardly walk. I can hardly walk. I can scarcely walk. I'm so tired. I can scarcely walk. I can hardly walk. I am so tired now. I can hardly walk. I can scarcely walk. I was so tired last night, so I could scarcely walk. I could hardly walk. I was so nervous in front of the people, so I could hardly speak. I could scarcely speak. I was so nervous in front of the people, so I could hardly speak. I could scarcely speak. We didn't have much time yesterday, so we hardly did anything. We hardly did anything. We scarcely did anything. We didn't have much time, so we hardly did anything. We scarcely did anything. Due to the request from the government, there were hardly any people in the touring spot. There were scarcely any people in the touring spot. The professor was explaining the equation so fast that I could hardly understand it, that I could scarcely understood it. The math problem was so difficult for me that I could hardly understand it, that I could scarcely understand it. The price of the car is such expensive that hardly anybody can afford to buy it. The price of the car is so expensive that scarcely anybody can buy it. The price of the car is so expensive that hardly anybody can buy it. The price of the watch is so expensive that scarcely anybody can afford to buy it. Can afford it. The price of the guitar is so expensive that hardly anybody can afford to buy it. The price of the guitar is so expensive that scarcely anybody can afford it. I am hardly hungry. I am scarcely hungry. I am scarcely hungry now. I am scarcely hungry now. I am scarcely hungry now. I am hardly hungry now. I am scarcely hungry now. I am hardly hungry now. There are hardly any people in the amusement park. There are hardly any people in the amusement park. There were scarcely any guests in the amusement park. I can hardly walk now. I can scarcely walk now. I can hardly breathe. I can scarcely breathe. I can scarcely breathe now. Help me. Give me medicine. Please give me drop infusion. I can hardly breathe. I can hardly breathe. I can hardly breathe. I can hardly breathe. I can scarcely breathe. I can scarcely breathe. I could hardly sleep last night. I could hardly sleep last night. I could scarcely 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 sleep last night. I could hardly sleep last night. I could scarcely sleep last night. I could hardly eat last night. I could scarcely eat last night. I could hardly concentrate on my study yesterday. I could scarcely concentrate on my study last night. Yesterday. I could hardly concentrate on the lecture yesterday. I could scarcely concentrate on the lecture yesterday. I can hardly concentrate on the lecture after eating lunch. I can scarcely concentrate on the lecture after lunch. I can hardly concentrate on the lecture after lunch. I can scarcely concentrate on the lecture after lunch. I can hardly pay attention to the lecture after lunch. I can scarcely pay attention to the lecture after lunch. I can hardly walk after I can hardly work after eating lunch. I can scarcely work after eating lunch. I am hardly hungry now. I am hardly hungry now. I am scarcely hungry now. I am scarcely hungry now. I am hardly hungry now. I could hardly walk. I could scarcely walk. There was hardly any water. There was hardly any water. There was hardly any water. There was scarcely any water in the bottle. There was hardly any water. There was hardly any water. There was hardly any water in the bottle. There was hardly any water in the bottle. There was scarcely any water in the bottle. There was hardly any water in the bottle. There was scarcely any water in the bottle. There was scarcely any wine in the bottle. There was scarcely any water in the bottle. There was hardly any wine in the bottle. There were hardly any children in the park. There were scarcely any children in the park. Hardly any. Scarcely any. There was hardly any money in my wallet when I went to the supermarket yesterday. There was scarcely any money in my wallet left when I went to the shopping mall yesterday, so I couldn't buy much. There were hardly any children in the shopping mall. There were hardly any children in the park yesterday. There was scarcely any children in the park yesterday. There were hardly any tourists in Asakusa yesterday. There were scarcely any tourists in Asakusa yesterday. There were scarcely any tourists there yesterday. There were hardly any tourists there yesterday. There was hardly any energy today. There is hardly any power, energy in me. There is hardly any power, energy in me. There is scarcely any power and energy in me today. I'm so tired. There is scarcely any energy in me. There is hardly any energy in me. There is scarcely any energy in me. There are hardly any students who can solve these questions. There are hardly any students who can solve these math problems, questions. There are scarcely any people who can speak English in this district area. There are scarcely any people who can speak German in this district. There are scarcely any people who can speak English here. There are scarcely any people who can speak French here. There are hardly any people who can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. There are few people who can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. There are hardly any people who can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. There are scarcely any people who can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly any. Hardly any. Scarcely any A. Scarcely any A. Scarcely any A. Hardly any A. Hardly any A. Hardly any A. Scarcely any A. There are hardly any people who can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. There are scarcely any people who can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. There are hardly any people who can get Nobel Prize. There are scarcely any people who can get Nobel Prize. There are hardly any people who can get Nobel Prize. There are hardly any people who can get Nobel Prize. There are hardly any people. There are hardly any people who can get Nobel Prize. There are scarcely any people who can get Nobel Prize. There are hardly any people who can get Grammy Award. There are hardly any people who can get Grammy Award. There are scarcely any people who can get Nobel Prize, Academy Award, Grammy Award. There are hardly any trees in the premises of the university. There are scarcely any trees in the premises of the school. There are hardly any subject that you can take in the university. There are scarcely any subject that you can take in the university. The scale of the university is very small, so the subjects you can take are limited. There are hardly any children in the park. There are scarcely any children in the park. There are hardly any children in the park. There are hardly any children in the park. There are scarcely 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 any children in the park. There are hardly any children in the park. There was hardly any money in my wallet yesterday. There was scarcely any money in my wallet yesterday. There was hardly any water in the bottle yesterday. There was scarcely any water in the bottle yesterday. There was hardly any water in the bathtub yesterday. There was scarcely any water in the bathtub. I'm asking because there was hardly any water in the bathtub. Who filled in it? Who filled it in? Who filled it in? Who filled it in? Who filled it out? There was scarcely any water in the bathtub. There was hardly any water in the bottle. There was scarcely any water in the bottle. There were scarcely any people in Kinkakuji Temple. There were scarcely any people, tourists, in Kinkakuji Temple. There were hardly any tourists in Kinkakuji Temple. There are scarcely any people who can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. There are hardly any people who can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. There are hardly any children in the park. There are scarcely any children in the park. There is hardly any money in my wallet now. There is scarcely any money in my wallet now. There are scarcely any trees in my house. There are scarcely any trees in my house. There are hardly any trees in my house. There are scarcely any women in the university. There are hardly any women in the university. There are hardly any women in the university. There are hardly any men in the university. There are scarcely any men in the university. There are hardly any men in the university. There are scarcely any men in the university. There is hardly any opportunity to get the job. There is hardly any opportunity to buy masks now. There is scarcely any opportunity to buy masks now. There is hardly any opportunity to buy masks now. There is scarcely any opportunity to buy masks now. There is scarcely any opportunity to buy masks. There is hardly any opportunity to buy masks now. There is scarcely any opportunity to buy masks now. There is hardly any opportunity to buy masks now. There is scarcely any opportunity to buy masks now. There is hardly any opportunity to buy masks now. There is scarcely any opportunity to buy masks now. There is hardly any opportunity to buy masks now. There is hardly any food that he can't eat. There is hardly any food that he can't eat. There is scarcely any food that he can't eat. He almost eats everything. He eats almost everything. He can eat almost everything. There are hardly any people who don't like the artist. There are scarcely any people who don't like the artist. The artist is loved by almost everyone. There were hardly any frozen products on the shelves. There were scarcely any frozen products on the shelves yesterday when I went to the supermarket. There was hardly any toilet paper on the shelves. There was hardly any toilet paper on the shelves. There was scarcely any toilet paper on the shelves. There was scarcely any toilet paper. I hardly ever visit the branch office. Our boss hardly ever visits the branch offices. Our manager hardly ever visits the branch. Our boss scarcely ever visits the branch. Our boss hardly ever visits the branch. Our boss scarcely ever visits the branch offices. Our boss hardly ever visits the branch office. Our boss scarcely ever visits the branch office. Visits. Our boss scarcely ever visits the branch office. My coworker hardly ever drink alcoholic beverages. My coworker scarcely ever drinks alcoholic beverages. My coworker hardly ever eats meat. My coworker scarcely ever eats meat. My friend hardly ever drinks beer. My coworker scarcely ever drinks beer. My friend scarcely ever drinks alcoholic beverages. My friend scarcely ever drinks alcoholic beverages. My coworker hardly ever takes part in the party. My coworker scarcely ever takes part in the party held in the company. My coworker scarcely ever participates in the company picnic. My coworker scarcely ever takes part in the company picnic. My friend hardly ever calls me. My friend scarcely ever takes part in the company picnic. My boss hardly ever gets angry. My boss scarcely ever gets angry. My boss scarcely ever gets angry. Fortunately, my boss scarcely ever gets angry. Fortunately, my boss hardly ever gets angry. Fortunately, my boss scarcely ever gets angry. My boss hardly ever gets angry. My relatives hardly ever visit us. My relatives scarcely ever visit us. I hardly ever visit my relative's house. I hardly ever visit my relative's house. I scarcely ever visit my relative's house. Relative's house. I hardly ever visit my cousin's house. I hardly ever visit my cousin's house. I scarcely ever visit my cousin's house. She hardly ever sings in front of the people at karaoke. She scarcely ever sings a song in front of people at karaoke. She scarcely ever asks a question in the meeting. She scarcely ever asks a question in the meeting. He hardly ever asks a question in the meeting. He hardly ever asks a question in the meeting. He scarcely ever asks a question in the meeting. He scarcely ever asks a question in the meeting. He scarcely ever asks a question in the meeting. Asks a question. She hardly ever asks a question in the meeting. She hardly ever asks a question in the meeting. She scarcely ever asks a question in the meeting. I had hardly stepped outside when it began to rain. Hardly had I stepped outside when it began to rain. I had scarcely stepped outside before it began to rain. Scarcely had I stepped outside when it began to rain. Before it began to rain. Hardly had I left my house when my friend called me. I had hardly left my house when my friend called me. I had scarcely left my house before my friend called me. Scarcely had I left my house before my friend called me. I had arrived at the train station when the train left. Hardly had I arrived at the train station when the train started. I had scarcely arrived at the train station before the train started. Scarcely had I arrived at the train station before the train started. Train left. I had hardly entered my room when everyone surprised me by turning on the light and singing a song in front of me for my birthday. Hardly had I entered my room when everyone surprised me by turning on the light and singing a song together. I had scarcely entered my room before everyone started to sing a song for my birthday. Scarcely had I entered my room before everyone started to sing a song for my birthday present. Isn't it nice? Okay? Hardly had I stepped outside when it began to rain. Scarcely had I stepped outside before it began to rain. I had hardly started my car when it broke down. Hardly had I started my car when it broke. I had scarcely started my car before it broke down. Scarcely had I started my car when it broke down. I had hardly fallen asleep when someone called me. Hardly had I fell asleep. Hardly had I fell asleep when someone called me. I had scarcely fell asleep before someone called me. Scarcely had I felt asleep before someone called me. Too annoying. I was sleeping comfortably, but someone called me suddenly while I'm sleeping comfortably. While I was sleeping comfortably. I had hardly started my computer when it crashed. Hardly had I started my computer when it crashed. I had scarcely started my computer before it crashed. Scarcely had I started my computer before it crashed. I had hardly ordered a computer online when the price of the computer went down. Hardly had I bought a computer online when the price of the computer went down. I had scarcely bought a computer online before the price of the computer went down. Scarcely had I bought a computer online, the price of the computer went down. I had hardly bought a smartphone online when the shop started a sale. Scarcely had I bought a computer online before the shop started to have a sale. I had scarcely bought a computer online before the shop started to have a sale. Oh my god. Hardly had I stepped outside when it began to rain. Scarcely had I stepped outside before it began to rain. I had hardly bought a digital camera at the store when the store started to have a sale. I had scarcely bought a computer at the shop before the shop started to have a sale. I had hardly tell a joke when everyone started to laugh. Hardly had I told a lie when everyone started to laugh, smile. I had scarcely told a joke before everyone started to laugh. Scarcely had I told a joke before everyone started to laugh. Hardly had I told a joke when everyone started to laugh. Scarcely had I told a joke before everyone started to laugh. The influencer had hardly gave the information when the fans started to buy the goods. Hardly had the influencer advertised the goods when the fans started to buy it. The fans started to buy it. The influencer had scarcely advertised the product before the fans started to buy it. Scarcely had the influencer advertised that. product before the fans started to buy it. The artist had hardly been noticed by the people around when everyone started to gather around him. Hardly had the artist been noticed by the people around when people started to gather around him. The artist had scarcely been noticed by the people around him before people started to gather around him. Scarcely had the artist been noticed by the people around before people started to gather around him. I rarely visit him. I rarely eat out. I rarely visit amusement park. I rarely eat meat. I seldom eat meat. I rarely go for a drink. I seldom go for a drink. He seldom go for a drink. He seldom drink alcoholic beverages. She rarely drink alcoholic beverages. She rarely drinks alcoholic beverages. He rarely drinks alcoholic beverages. He rarely visits my office. He rarely be late for. He is rarely late for school. He is rarely late for school. My coworker rarely make a mistake. My coworker seldom make a mistake. My coworker seldom if ever make a mistake. My coworker rarely if ever make a mistake. The pianist rarely if ever make a mistake. She is almost perfect. The pianist rarely if ever make a mistake. The pianist seldom if ever make a mistake. The pianist rarely if ever make a mistake. The pianist seldom if ever make a mistake. The pianist seldom if ever make a mistake. The pianist seldom if ever make a mistake. The pianist rarely if ever make a mistake. The pianist rarely if ever makes a mistake. The pianist seldom if ever makes a mistake. The pianist rarely if ever makes a mistake. The pianist seldom if ever makes mistakes. The pianist rarely if ever makes mistakes. The guitarist rarely the opera singer rarely if ever eat curry. The opera singer seldom if ever eats curry. My friend rarely if ever go to karaoke. My friend seldom if ever goes to karaoke. My friend rarely if ever goes to crowded place. My friend seldom if ever goes to a crowded place. My friend rarely if ever goes to crowded places. My friend seldom if ever goes to crowded places. My friend seldom if ever goes to amusement park. My friend rarely visit crowded places. My friend rarely if ever goes to crowded places. My friend seldom if ever goes to crowded places. I rarely goes to crowded places. I seldom goes to crowded places. I seldom drink alcoholic beverages. I rarely drink alcoholic beverages. I rarely go to the restaurant. I seldom go to the restaurant. I seldom stop by at the convenience store. I rarely, if ever, visit the convenience store. I buy goods online. I rarely, if ever, buy goods online. I seldom, if ever, buy goods online. Elderly people rarely, if ever, buy goods online. Elderly people rarely, if ever, buy goods online. Or they don't know how to buy online. I rarely buy goods online. I seldom buy goods online. I seldom, if ever, buy goods online. She seldom buy goods online. She seldom buy goods online. She rarely 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 buys 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 merchandise online. She rarely buys merchandise online. She rarely, if ever, buys merchandise online. She rarely, if ever, uses online shop. 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 She rarely, if ever, uses the online shop. She seldom, if ever, uses the online shop. She seldom, if ever, uses the online shop. He rarely uses online shop. He rarely uses online shop. He rarely, if ever, uses online shop. He rarely, if ever, goes to work on foot. He seldom, if ever, goes to work on foot. My coworker rarely goes to work by bike. My coworker rarely, if ever, goes to work by bike. Most of the employees rarely, if ever, go to work by bike. Most of the employees don't go to work by bike. Most of the employees rarely go to work by bike. Most of the employees rarely, if ever, go to work by bike. Most of the employees rarely go to work by bike. Most of the employees rarely, if ever, go to work on foot. The supermarket rarely, if ever, has a sale. The supermarket seldom, if ever, has a sale. The shopping mall Rarely, if ever, has a sale. The restaurant, rarely, if ever, has a discount. The restaurant, seldom, if ever, has a sale, has a discount. Unfortunately, my boss rarely, if ever, smiles. Unfortunately, my boss seldom, if ever, smiles. Unfortunately, my boss rarely, 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 if ever, smiles. Unfortunately, my boss rarely smiles. Rarely, if ever, smiles. Unfortunately, my boss rarely, if ever, smiles. Unfortunately, my boss rarely, if ever, smiles. Unfortunately, my boss seldom, if ever, smiles. I don't want to go out today. I don't either. I don't want to go for a drink after work. I don't either. I can run as fast as the professionals. I cannot either. I cannot concentrate on my study after lunch. I cannot either. I am not a teenager anymore. I am not either. I am not a teenager anymore. I am not either. I am not a student anymore. I am not either. I don't like natto. I don't either. I cannot understand the question. I cannot either. I cannot understand what the professor is saying. I cannot either. Me neither. Me neither. Neither can I. I couldn't understand what the professor was saying at today's class, at today's lecture. I couldn't either. I couldn't eat much at lunchtime today. I couldn't either. I wasn't feeling well last night. I wasn't either. I couldn't sleep well last night. I couldn't either. I couldn't sleep enough last night. I couldn't either. I was preparing for the test late at night. I couldn't sleep enough last night. I couldn't either. Me neither. Me neither. Neither did I. Neither could I. I cannot concentrate on my study because of the noise coming from outside. Neither can I. Me neither. I cannot either. I'm so sleepy. I cannot concentrate on my study. I cannot either. Me neither. Neither can I. I'm not feeling well now. I'm not feeling fine now. Neither am I. Neither am I. Neither am I. Neither am I. I don't want to spend my money on gambling. Neither do I. Neither do I. Me neither. I don't want to spend my money on gambling. For gambling. I don't want either. Neither do I. I can't leave my son alone. Neither can I. I don't want to go abroad and work. Neither do I. Me neither. I don't want to be transferred to another city. Neither do I. Me neither. I don't want to be transferred to another place. I don't want to be transferred to another city. I don't either. Neither do I. Me neither. Nor can I. Nor do I. I cannot have much time today. Nor can I. I cannot swim as fast as before. Nor can I. I cannot understand the physics. Nor can I. Nor can I. Nor can I. I am not feeling well now. Nor am I. Nor am I. I am not hungry now. Nor am I. Me neither. I don't like to make a speech in front of people. Nor do I. Me neither. I don't want to make a speech in front of the people. Nor do I. I am not good at getting up early. Nor am I. I am not good at waking up early. Nor am I. I am not good at waking up early. Nor am I. I am not good at getting up early. Nor am I. I am not good at waking up early. Nor am I. I am not good at sleeping early. Nor am I. Nor am I. I couldn't sleep well last night. Nor could I. I couldn't sleep enough last night because I was preparing for the test. Nor could I. I couldn't eat enough last night because I was so sick. Nor could I. Nor could I. I couldn't sleep because of the pressure yesterday. Nor could I. I couldn't sleep early last night because I was nervous of the result announcement today. Nor could I. 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 I cannot speak Spanish. Nor can I. Nor can I. Me neither. I cannot speak English. Nor can I. Nor can I. I cannot speak Japanese. Nor can I. Nor can I. Neither can I. I cannot buy such expensive watch. Nor can I. Nor can I. I don't want to spend much money on such a thing. Nor do I. I don't want to spend such a lot of money for gambling. Nor do I. I don't want to buy a house now. Nor do I. I don't want to buy a car now. Nor do I. 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 Nor vs. Nor vs. Nor vs. I don't want to study now. Nor do I. Nor do I. I'm not feeling well. Nor am I. I'm not feel like participating in the party. Nor am I. I'm not feeling well now. Nor am I. I'm not feeling going to school today. Nor am I. I don't feel like going to work today. Nor do I. I don't feel like going to school. I don't feel like going to school. I don't feel like going to school today. I don't feel like going to school today. Nor do I. Nor do I. Nor do I. Nor do I. I will not go to school today. Nor will I. Nor will I. I will not agree with you. Nor will I. Nor will I. I will not vote for him. Nor will I. Nor will I. I will not go to the shopping mall today. Nor will I. Nor will I. I will not talk to anyone today. Nor will I. Nor will I. I will not take a trip this year. Nor will I. I will not take a train today. Nor will I. I will not take public transportation this year. Nor will I. I will not take public transportation this year. Nor will I. 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 Me neither. Me neither. Hardly anybody was at the park. When I went to Asakusa yesterday, hardly anybody was there. Hardly anybody can understand what you mean. Hardly anybody can understand the equation created by Einstein. Hardly anybody can understand you. Hardly anybody will be able to understand you if you speak so fast. 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 Hardly anybody will be able to understand you if you speak so fast. Hardly anybody will buy such expensive watch. Hardly anybody will buy such expensive car. Hardly anybody was at the park today. Hardly anybody will visit such a boring place. Hardly anybody will agree with you. Hardly anybody will agree with you. It was so hot yesterday, so hardly anybody went outside. Because of the request from the government, hardly anybody went outside yesterday. Hardly anybody can speak English here. Hardly anybody can speak Japanese in the country. Hardly anybody can speak English in the country. Hardly anybody speaks Japanese in the country. Hardly anybody knows about the artist in the country. Hardly anybody knows the artist in the country. Hardly anybody knows about the artist in the region. Hardly anybody knows about the artist in the region. Hardly anybody can speak English in the region. Hardly anybody agrees to the policy created by the government in the region. Hardly anybody has tried raw fish in the region. Hardly anybody has tried raw fish sashimi in the region. Hardly anybody tried natto, fermented soybeans in the region. Hardly anybody has been to Japan in the region. Hardly anybody knows about mathematics in the region. Hardly anybody knows about the artist in the region. Hardly anybody knows about the artist in my class. Hardly anybody has a PlayStation 4 in my class. Hardly anybody has a PlayStation 4 in my class. Hardly anybody studies every day in my class. Hardly anybody studies every day in our class. Hardly anybody studies every day in my 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 class. Hardly anybody studies English every day in my class. Hardly anybody can understand what the professor is saying. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anyone can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Scarcely anyone can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Hardly anybody can run 100 meters within 10 seconds. Okay. I will finish talking here. Thank you for watching. See you next time.